I'll never forget the heartfelt conversation I had with my father when I told him about my engagement. He pulled me aside, his expression clouded with concern, and asked if I was truly certain about marrying Stephen. While he acknowledged my love for him, he couldn't shake the feeling that Stephen might not be the right match for me. Confused, I asked him why he felt that way. My father admitted that while Stephen was affectionate and respectful, there was something about him, and his mother, that felt off. He couldn't quite explain it, attributing his unease to a father's instinct. Despite my protests, he shared his concerns. Stephen often bragged to his friends about my wealth, painting me as a trophy rather than a partner. My father feared that Stephen's love wasn't as genuine as I believed. At the time, I brushed off his warnings, blinded by love and desperate for stability. I clung to the relationship. Losing my mother 3 years prior had left me adrift, and with my father's health declining, I craved the security of a new family. My father had built his wealth through years of hard work and smart investments, ensuring a comfortable life for us. I, too, had a steady job and was financially independent. In contrast, Stephen and his mother, Megan, came from a modest background and often voiced their dissatisfaction with not having more. Even after moving into my home post-marriage, their hunger for a more extravagant lifestyle remained insatiable. Looking back, I now see what my father saw before I could. At the time, I was a young woman in love, trying to find solace in a relationship that, in hindsight, was never built on the right foundation. I still recall the first time I sensed something was truly wrong. Stephen and Megan openly lamented the size of my townhouse compared to my father's mansion. "It's such a shame," they mused, "that your dad lives in luxury while you settled for something so small." I explained that despite my father's wealth, I was just an office worker with a modest income, and buying even this home was a stretch, one I could only afford with my dad's help on the down payment. Megan, ever materialistic, casually suggested that my father should have bought me a better house, hinting that my mother's sudden passing must have left me some inheritance. I tried to set the record straight. Whatever my mother had left was rightfully my father's, and I wasn't entitled to more. That was when Stephen made a bold and appalling suggestion: my father should swap houses with us since he was living alone and no longer needed such a large space. Megan eagerly agreed. I was horrified and immediately refused. My father deserved to live comfortably in his home for the rest of his days. Their response was chillingly calculating. "Well," they said, "he won't be around forever. You'll inherit it soon enough." Their nonchalant discussion of my father's eventual passing sickened me. Worse still, they frequently pushed me to ask him for more money, despite the fact that we were not struggling financially. Their fixation on wealth was impossible to ignore. The full extent of their greed became undeniable after my father's passing. Overcome with grief, I received little support from Stephen or Megan. Instead, they were impatient, eager for the reading of the will. Their disinterest in my mourning was painful enough, but their refusal to attend my father's funeral, claiming he meant nothing to them, shattered me. When the will was finally read, their obsession with my inheritance reached new heights. They demanded to be present, arguing that Stephen, as my husband, should have a claim. The lawyer's response was cold and firm: "Your son is not mentioned in the will, Megan. He has no legal standing to be here." The moment we returned home, they wasted no time in interrogating me. "So, how much did you inherit?" Megan pressed, her eyes gleaming with expectation. I took a deep breath and answered simply, "Nothing. My parents chose to donate their remaining wealth to charity." Their shock was immediate. "That can't be," Stephen snapped. "Your parents were rich. Are you sure you're not hiding anything?" "Check my bank statements if you want," I replied. "There's no hidden fortune. My father made his choice, and I respect it." Megan's face twisted with anger. "You need to contest the will. You deserve that money." I shook my head. "No, my parents' decision stands." The weeks that followed were tense. Stephen grew distant, constantly checking my finances, as if still hoping to uncover a hidden fortune. The truth was clear: he hadn't married me for love. He had married me for the promise of wealth that would never come. Then, one day, the mask finally slipped. "All these years, wasted," Stephen muttered bitterly. "I married you for nothing." His words hit like a dagger. "What do you mean, Stephen?" I asked, my voice trembling. Megan scoffed. "Oh, don't play dumb. Who would marry you without considering the money? We thought you'd be set for life. Now we know you've got nothing, and my son has wasted years on you." A painful silence followed, but the truth was clear. My father had been right all along. They had never loved me, they had loved the idea of wealth. Megan turned to Stephen with a cruel finality. There's no point staying with her, it's time to move on. Next time, find a rich wife. Despite the devastation, I knew what I had to do. Fine, Stephen, if a divorce is what you want, you'll have it. And with that, I took my first step toward reclaiming my life from their deception. Megan and Stephen seemed relieved that I wasn't making a scene. Maybe they were even surprised by how composed I was, unaware that every day, I was quietly falling apart. On my way to work, tears would spill down my face, and I'd sit in my car for hours, crying before and after my shifts. Yet, neither of them noticed my swollen eyes or questioned why my routine had suddenly stretched longer than usual. Once Megan realized there was no inheritance in my future, she barely acknowledged my existence. That only solidified my determination to end this marriage swiftly. I arranged for Stephen and Megan to move into a rented apartment nearby. They settled in quickly, and as our divorce proceedings progressed, Stephen honored our agreement. He made no claim on my house. In return, I didn't seek alimony. To him, it was a clean and simple transaction. On the day our divorce was finalized, I decided to take one last step. I went to their rental to return my wedding and engagement rings. Standing at their doorstep, I held the small box out to Stephen. I just want to return these, I said. This marriage brought nothing but pain into my life, and I'd rather not keep any reminders of it. Megan scoffed, her eyes glinting with amusement. Are you sure? You might need the money. It's funny, you used to look down on our poverty, and now look at you. My son was kind enough to let you keep the rings. You might have to sell them when you lose your job. Her words stung, but I laughed, and the sound seemed to unsettle them. Megan's smirk faltered, and Stephen's expression tightened with confusion. Why would I need to sell the rings, Megan? I asked lightly. You don't need to feel embarrassed for me. We already know my parents left me nothing. They lost everything, right? I let my words linger, watching as curiosity flickered across their faces. Megan's eyes narrowed. What are you getting at? I smirked. I never said I didn't receive an inheritance. I simply told you I didn't get any money. I paused, savoring the moment. My parents left me something much more valuable. Megan's face twisted with confusion. What the hell does that mean? You have an inheritance? I nodded. Oh, I have quite the inheritance. My parents saw right through you and Stephen, so they included a special clause in their will. They left me no cash, but instead, I inherited this entire neighborhood. Megan's mouth fell open. That's a lie. We would have known about it. We even signed our lease with an estate manager who never mentioned you. My parents arranged for the estate manager to handle things until I could claim ownership. I explained. They wanted me to see who truly cared for me. And, well, you failed the test. Megan's face turned red with anger. That's impossible. You're just trying to save face because you have nothing. Stephen, more skeptical, crossed his arms. Oh really? If that's true, why don't we just call the landlord and confirm? Go ahead, I said with a knowing smile. The moment they placed the call, I watched their expressions shift from smug confidence to pure shock as the estate manager confirmed everything. When they hung up, their faces were a mix of fury and panic. You tricked us, Megan shrieked. You let us believe you were broke. I tilted my head. I never lied. You assumed, and now, you're reaping the consequences. Megan's voice trembled with desperation. You've kept all this wealth to yourself. You manipulated Stephen into divorcing you and made sure he wouldn't get anything. I laughed at the irony. You're calling me manipulative? Stephen married me under false pretenses, and you encouraged him to push for a divorce, assuming there was nothing to gain. If anyone played themselves, it was both of you. Stephen's face paled. Megan, still in denial, sneered. Well, joke's on you. Stephen is already seeing someone else, someone actually wealthy. You'll regret this. I arched an eyebrow. Oh, Stephen, does your new girlfriend know your history? Don't worry, I'll make sure she does. Stephen's face darkened, but before he could respond, I turned and walked away, leaving them stewing in their humiliation. Over the following weeks, they showed up at my doorstep repeatedly, begging for forgiveness. They were desperate to avoid eviction, knowing an eviction record would make finding a new home difficult, but I had already made up my mind. I reached out to Stephen's new interest and told her everything. Disgusted by his actions, she ended things immediately and even sent me screenshots of their breakup as proof. When Stephen and Megan's frustration turned to harassment, I called the police, ensuring a restraining order was put in place. Once the official property transfer was complete, I didn't hesitate to evict them. They seemed shocked that I had followed through, but there was no going back. When they tried to trespass again, I had the police deal with them. Word of their deceit spread quickly, and soon, they were socially ostracized, forcing them to leave town in disgrace. As for me, I embraced my newfound financial independence, free from their toxicity. My parents had left me a legacy far greater than money, the wisdom to see through greed and the strength to stand on my own. And that was worth more than anything Stephen or Megan could ever take from me.